The air in the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Sentinel was a foul cocktail, a layered miasma of stale coffee, body odor, diesel exhaust from the generators that powered this metal-skinned beast, and the sharp, electric scent of ozone bleeding from overworked servers. It was the smell of controlled panic, the olfactory signature of an army pretending it was not perpetually on the edge of chaos. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary, incessant drone, casting a sterile, greenish pallor on the faces of the men and women who moved with the jerky, over-caffeinated energy of a colony of disturbed ants. Massive screens lined one wall, a flickering mosaic of topographical maps, drone feeds, and cascading lines of encrypted data. Each pixel represented a potential life, a possible death, a calculation in the brutal arithmetic of modern warfare. This was the brain of the brigade, a place where information was supposed to be tamed, analyzed, and transformed into decisive action. Yet, for all its technological grandeur, the room felt fragile, a thin shell of order against a desert that promised only heat and hostility. In the midst of this carefully orchestrated bedlam sat a woman. She occupied a simple folding chair in a corner of the room, a place most would consider a tactical blind spot, an appendix to the main action. She was a study in profound stillness, an island of calm in a sea of agitated motion. Her fatigues were a sterile, anonymous olive drab, devoid of the Velcro patches that announced rank, unit, or name. They were clean, functional, and utterly unremarkable. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical knot that offered no hint of personal vanity. Her face, caught in the cold wash of a secondary monitor, was plain, with features that seemed designed for the specific purpose of being forgotten. She was not young, but not old. She existed in that indeterminate age that comes from a life lived in service to a singular, consuming purpose. She held no tablet, no radio, no weapon. Her hands rested in her lap, one loosely cupped over the other, a posture of serene patience. She simply watched the main screens, her gaze steady and analytical, her expression as flat and unreadable as the desert horizon outside the reinforced walls. To the casual observer, she was nobody, a bureaucratic ghost, a forgotten civilian liaison perhaps, waiting for an escort that was hours late. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne was not a casual observer. He was, in his own estimation, a connoisseur of command, a collector of deference. His face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, all sharp angles and weathered confidence, though his boots had only ever known dust, not sea salt. His uniform was a masterpiece of tailored precision, his single star polished to a point of blinding brilliance. Authority radiated from him like heat from a furnace, a palpable force he had cultivated over a 30-year career built on a foundation of booming commands and an unshakable belief in his own inherent superiority. He moved through the TOC not as a commander inspecting his troops, but as a landlord striding through a tenant's messy apartment, his lip curled in a faint, perpetual sneer of disapproval. His entourage of sycophantic junior officers trailed him like pilot fish trailing a shark, their notebooks open, their expressions a mixture of terror and adoration. Thorne believed that leadership was a performance, and he was its Olivier. Every gesture was calculated, every word a pronouncement. His gaze swept the room, a hawk's eye looking for the slightest imperfection, the one mouse that dared to twitch in his barn. He found it. His eyes narrowed, snagging on the still figure in the corner. The woman. He stopped, his polished boots grinding on the gritty floor. The sudden cessation of his movement caused a ripple effect. His aides bumped into one another, a cascade of minor clumsiness. Thorn ignored them. All his focus, all the immense gravitational pull of his ego, centered on that small, quiet woman. She was an anomaly, a disruption in the natural order of things. Her stillness was an affront. Her anonymity was an insult. In his world, everyone had a place, a rank, a box to be put in. She fit none of them. Her presence, in its quiet refusal to participate in the room's frantic energy, felt like a judgment. It was a silent, passive challenge to his absolute authority, and it was intolerable. He began his approach. The men and women at the consoles felt the shift in atmospheric pressure. Conversations faltered. The frantic clatter of keyboards slowed. All eyes, furtively, turned to watch the general bear down on the unknown woman. It was the grim, familiar theater of the powerful seeking to make an example of the powerless. A lion singling out the weakest gazelle, not for hunger, but for sport, to remind the herd of its place. Thorn came to a halt directly in front of her chair, positioning himself so that she was forced to look up at him. He was a mountain of starched fabric and self-regard. He folded his arms across his chest, a classic power stance he'd perfected at West Point. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the hum of the servers. "You," he began, his voice not a shout, but a low, menacing growl that carried more weight than any yell. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're doing in my TOC, but I know you're in my chair's line of sight to the main screen, and you are not displaying the proper respect for this command post." The woman did not flinch. She did not shrink. Her eyes, a cool, clear gray, lifted slowly to meet his. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was nothing but a placid, almost clinical observation. It was the look of a biologist examining a particularly noisy insect. This unnerving calm was the first crack in Thorn's practiced composure. He expected fear, or at least a stammered apology. He received only silence. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper that was somehow more public than a shout. "This is a high-tempo operational environment, madam. This isn't a USO lounge. We are running a war game that simulates the defense of this entire sector. People here have jobs to do. What precisely is your job?" The woman's gaze remained locked on his. After a beat of silence that stretched to an uncomfortable length, she finally spoke. Her voice was as calm and as devoid of inflection as her expression. It was a voice that seemed unused to small talk, a precision instrument designed for the transmission of pure data. "I am observing," she said. The simplicity of the answer was gasoline on the fire of his indignation. Observing? He was the observer. He was the one who judged. She was a piece of furniture, a temporary fixture. "Observing," he repeated, the word dripping with scorn. "And who gave you permission to observe my command? Who is your commanding officer? I want a name and a rank, and I want it now." This was the heart of the matter. The demand for a name, a rank, a CO. It was the fundamental question of the military universe. Who do you belong to? Who is responsible for you? To whom do you answer? Without an answer, you were nothing. You were debris. The woman's expression did not change. Her unnerving serenity was a shield he could not penetrate. He felt a flush of hot anger creep up his neck. He was a brigadier general, Men with eagles on their collars snapped to attention when he entered a room. This drab, anonymous woman was looking at him as if he were a mild inconvenience, a piece of loud, malfunctioning equipment. "I asked you a question," he snapped, his voice finally rising, cracking the whip of his authority. "Who is your CO?" She considered the question for a moment, not as if searching for an answer, but as if deciding which of several correct answers would be the most efficient. "That's a complicated question," she replied, her tone still maddeningly level. "It is the simplest question in the United States military," Thorne roared, his control finally shattering. Several operators flinched at their consoles. "Everyone has a commanding officer. Now give me a name or I will have you escorted out of this facility in handcuffs. Is that clear?" He was close enough now that she could smell the mint on his breath. A desperate attempt to mask the coffee and the fury. The woman seemed to arrive at a decision. She unfolded her hands. A subtle shift in her posture, almost imperceptible, seemed to gather the ambient energy in the room toward her. "For the purposes of your immediate inquiry, General," she said, her voice retaining its clinical precision. "The individual with ultimate operational authority over the system you are currently stress testing, and by extension, everyone in this room, would be me." A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the TOC. It was a statement of such breathtaking, such impossible arrogance that for a moment, no one, least of all Thorne, could process it. It was as if a janitor had just claimed to own the Pentagon. The sheer audacity of it was stunning. Thorne's face, which had been flushed with anger, went pale with a rage so pure it was almost silent. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the rigid scaffolding of the chain of command, and this woman had just taken a sledgehammer to its very foundation. He found his voice, a choked, strangled thing. You are relieved of your duties, whatever they are. You are to report to the base master-at-arms for immediate confinement. You are a security risk, and I suspect, mentally unstable." He turned to his aide, a young, terrified-looking captain. "Captain, remove this person." The captain, pale and sweating, took a hesitant step forward. He looked from the incandescent fury of his general to the placid, unmoving woman. He did not know what to do. He was saved from the impossible choice by a sudden, catastrophic shift in reality. It began with a sound, a high-frequency whine that was felt in the teeth more than it was heard. The lights in the TOC flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into an emergency-lit gloom of terrifying red. Simultaneously, every screen on the wall dissolved into a blizzard of pixelated static, replaced a second later by a single, pulsing icon in the center of the main display. A stylized crimson phoenix. Alarm klaxons began to blare, a deafening, panicked shriek that vibrated through the floor plates. "What in God's name is that?" Thorne bellowed into the chaos. "Report! Someone get me a sit-rep now!" The answers came in a panicked chorus from the darkness. "Sir, we've lost the network. All comms are down, internal and external. Sir, the Sentinel grid is offline. It's not just us, it's the entire sector. Drone swarm inbound, multiple vectors. Sir, they're not on our IFF, they're hostile. It's a coordinated attack, sir, cyber and kinetic. It's a full-spectrum assault." The room descended into a predictable pattern of institutional failure. Men shouted protocols that no longer applied. They tried to reboot systems that were no longer theirs to command. They followed contingency plans that were written for a war that had become obsolete in the space of 3 seconds. Thorne stood in the middle of it all, a statue of impotent rage. He barked orders that no one could follow, demanding information that no one could access. His authority, which had seemed so absolute moments before, had evaporated. The performance was over, the theater was on fire, and he had forgotten his lines. He was just a man in a dark room, shouting into a storm. And in the corner, the woman moved. She did not stand up in a rush. She rose with a fluid, economical grace, a dancer taking her place on stage. The red emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, and for a moment, she seemed to grow in stature, her unassuming form taking on a new and terrible purpose. While everyone else was reacting to the chaos, she was already moving toward a solution. She ignored the shouting, the alarms, the panicked bodies rushing past her. Her focus was absolute. She glided to a small, forgotten-looking auxiliary console, a maintenance terminal that most of the operators didn't even know was active. Her fingers, which had rested so placidly in her lap, now flew across the keyboard. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. She did not seem to be typing so much as conducting, her hands a blur of focused intent. Lines of code, emerald green against the black screen, began to scroll at an impossible speed. It was a language no one else in the room could read, a conversation she was having directly with the soul of the machine. "Get me a direct hardline to the E7 Wedgetail on station at grid 34 Delta," she said, her voice cutting through the din like a surgeon's scalpel. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, an expectation that the universe would bend to her will. A young sergeant at the comms station, his face a mask of panic, looked up. "Ma'am, all comms are down. The network is compromised." "You have a PRC 117G under your desk," the woman stated, not even looking at him. "Patch its transceiver directly into the auxiliary port B7 on my console. Use frequency hop 77.4, authentication code 09er Alpha Tango Omega. I am opening a backdoor handshake on a legacy satellite channel. You have 15 seconds. The sergeant stared, bewildered. The command was a string of gibberish to him. But the sheer, undeniable authority in her voice bypassed his confusion and accessed a more primal instinct. Obedience. He fumbled under his desk, pulled out the radio, and began frantically trying to connect the cables as she had directed. Thorne, who had been watching this with a mixture of fury and disbelief, finally found his footing. "Who do you think you are? You will not touch that equipment. You are not authorized." The woman ignored him as completely as if he were a piece of furniture. Her focus was absolute. "Firewall is bypassed," she murmured to herself, her fingers still a blur. "They used a nested polymorphic worm. Clever, but noisy." She typed a final complex command string and hit enter. On the main screen, the Crimson Phoenix icon flickered. For a second, it seemed to grow larger, more menacing. Then, it shattered into a million tiny pixels, vanishing completely. The tactical maps, grainy and distorted, began to reappear. A cheer went up from a corner of the room. "Network integrity at 17%. I've got a signal." "Do not reconnect to the main grid," the woman commanded, her voice sharp. "You will slave all essential C2 functions through my terminal. I am establishing a closed-loop, encrypted network on a discrete spectrum. All other systems are to be considered hostile until I have scrubbed them." She turned her head slightly, her gaze falling on the tactical plot officer. "Give me a real-time plot of that drone swarm. I need velocity, altitude, and payload signatures." "Ma'am, the system is too slow," he began. "I have allocated 40% of the system's remaining processing power to your station," she countered instantly. "Refresh your screen." The officer blinked, tapped a key, and his jaw dropped as the drone swarm materialized on his map, a terrifying cloud of red icons sweeping toward the base. "Signatures are unconventional, ma'am," he stammered. "They're broadcasting multiple false signals. I can't get a lock." "They're using a signal mimicry algorithm," the woman said, a flicker of something that might have been professional appreciation in her voice. "Feed your raw sensor data directly to me." She turned back to her console, and a new window opened on her screen, a chaotic waterfall of raw data. Her eyes scanned it, unblinking. "There," she said. "The mimicry has a recursive flaw. It generates a ghost signal at a 1.2 millisecond delay. Filter for that delay. It will give you your true targets." The tactical officer's fingers flew across his own board. "My God," he whispered. "It's working. I have clean locks. I have clean target locks on all of them." In the span of less than 2 minutes, the woman had single-handedly wrestled the central nervous system of the brigade back from a catastrophic, state-level cyber attack, established a new, secure network from scratch, and diagnosed and solved a complex electronic warfare problem that had baffled the entire staff. She had done it all with a preternatural calm, her voice never rising, her movements precise and efficient. The chaos in the room had subsided, replaced by a new sound. The sound of quiet, focused work, all of it revolving around her. The operators, from the lowest private to the senior colonels, now looked only to her, awaiting her next command. She had not asked for command. She had simply assumed it by being the only person in the room who was not drowning. Thorne stood by, a ghost in his own command post. His authority was gone. His bluster was useless. He was a man with a sword in a gunfight, a relic. The men and women in the room, his men and women, did not even see him anymore. They had found their true north, and it was this quiet, plain woman who was now the calm, beating heart of the entire operation. He watched, his face a frozen mask of humiliation, as she orchestrated the defense of his base. He saw his own irrelevance in real time, and it was a more devastating blow than any enemy weapon could have delivered. The doors to the TOC burst open, admitting a swirl of dust and the imposing figure of a man who moved with the quiet gravity of someone who did not need to shout to be heard. It was General Wallace, the 4-star commander of the entire theater of operations. His face was a grim landscape of concern, his eyes deep-set and intelligent, taking in the scene in an instant. The red emergency lighting, the jury-rigged comms, the focused intensity of the operators, and the utterly useless-looking Brigadier General Thorne standing off to the side. Wallace's gaze swept the room, searching. He was looking for the center of gravity, the point around which this new, strange order revolved. His eyes found the woman at the auxiliary console. He saw her back, the focused set of her shoulders, the way the other officers were angled towards her, like iron filings to a magnet. He began to walk forward, his path taking him directly past Thorne. Thorne saw his chance for redemption. He snapped to attention, his voice strained. "General Wallace, sir, we are under a full-spectrum electronic and kinetic assault. The situation is fluid, but I am taking measures to regain control." Wallace did not stop. He did not slow down. He did not even turn his head. He walked past Thorne as if he were a coat rack, his focus entirely on the woman at the console. The dismissal was so complete, so absolute. It was more brutal than any reprimand. It was a public declaration of Thorne's utter irrelevance. The blood drained from Thorne's face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. Wallace came to a halt, a respectful 2 paces behind the woman. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. He simply stood, his hand clasped behind his back, and watched. He recognized the language of mastery when he saw it. He watched as she rerouted Sentinel's defensive fire control systems through her new network, linking them to the clean targeting data she had just generated. He listened as she calmly issued fire missions, not in the panicked shouts of a desperate defense, but in the cool, clipped tones of an engineer testing a new piece of hardware. Phalanx Systems 1 through 4, slave to my terminal, she commanded. Engage all targets matching filter criteria Delta 7. Firing solution is predictive based on ghost signal trajectory. Authorize engagement. Now. Outside, the deep guttural roar of the Phalanx CIWS cannons erupted, a sound like the sky being torn in half. On the tactical screen, the cloud of red icons representing the drone swarm began to blink out, one by one, erased by a wall of computer-guided tungsten. Within 30 seconds, the threat was gone. The sky was clear. The woman typed one final line of code. The main screens flickered, and the normal, cool blue tactical displays returned. The klaxons cut off, plunging the room into a sudden, profound silence. The red emergency lights gave way to the steady, humming fluorescence. The crisis was over. She leaned back in her chair, a small, almost imperceptible exhalation of breath. It was the first sign of fatigue, or perhaps release, she had shown. Slowly, she turned, as if sensing the 4-star presence behind her. Her eyes, still calm, still analytical, met General Wallace's. And then the moment that would be etched into the memory of every person in that room occurred. General Wallace, a man who commanded armies, who advised presidents, a living legend of the modern military, straightened his back and snapped to the most rigid, impeccable position of attention imaginable. It was a gesture of such profound, startling respect that it sent a shockwave through the TOC. His voice, when he spoke, was clear, formal, and filled with a deference that bordered on reverence. It boomed in the silent room. Dr. Aris, my apologies for the state of the network. We were told you were on site for a quiet diagnostic. I see the exercise escalated beyond the pre-planned parameters. The name and the title, Dr. Aris. It descended on the room like a physical weight. It was a name spoken only in hushed, classified circles, a name that was more myth than reality. Dr. Evelyn Aris, the civilian architect of the entire global command and control system, the woman who had designed and built the very digital backbone of the Western world's military power. She wasn't a user of the system. She was its creator. Her authority wasn't derived from a commission or a rank. It was inherent. She was the ghost in the machine, the oracle of the network. Her call sign, known only to a handful of people on the planet, was, fittingly, Oracle. Thorne felt the world tilt on its axis. The blood pounded in his ears. Dr. Aris, the woman he had threatened, the woman he had called mentally unstable and ordered to be arrested. He felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine, a primal fear he hadn't felt since his first day at basic training. He had not just insulted a civilian contractor. He had, in his blind arrogance, tried to bully a god. Dr. Aris looked at the 4-star general standing at attention before her. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The system's core logic held, General Wallace. The failure was at the human interface layer. The response protocols were inadequate. Her gaze, like the lens of a powerful telescope, swiveled away from Wallace and came to rest on Marcus Thorne. The full weight of that calm, gray-eyed stare now fell upon him. There was no anger in it. There was no triumph. There was only analysis. She was looking at him as she had looked at the flawed code of the enemy's virus, a vulnerability to be diagnosed, understood, and corrected. "Brigadier General Thorne," she said, her voice still quiet, yet it dominated the room. "Your initial response to an unidentified presence in your command center was to escalate based on superficial data. You made an assumption based on my gender and my lack of insignia. You perceived a lack of deference and interpreted it as a challenge to your authority." She rose from her chair and walked slowly toward him. The room held its breath. "Your behavior was not merely unprofessional," she continued, her voice clinical and precise. "It was a critical tactical failure. Your ego created a blind spot that prevented you from accurately assessing your available assets. In a real-world scenario, your decision to have me removed from this TOC would have resulted in the complete loss of this base and every soul in it. You did not see a potential solution. You saw something that did not fit your preconceived notion of what a soldier should look like." She stopped directly in front of him. For the first time, a flicker of something hard, something ancient and unyielding entered her eyes. "Your question," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "was, who is your CO? You have spent your career looking up the chain of command. It has never occurred to you to look at the foundation upon which that chain is built. General Wallace and every other commander in this theater answer to the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense answers to the President. The President's ability to command is predicated on one thing: the absolute integrity of the command and control network. The network I designed. The network I maintain. The network I am." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the marrow of his bones. "So, to answer your question, General, in this room, in this domain, on this network, I am." It was a complete and total dismantling. She had not raised her voice. She had not insulted him. She had simply held up a mirror and forced him to see the catastrophic failure of his own character, reframing it in the cold, hard language of tactical reality. He had failed the test. Not her test. His own. Thorne stood there, stripped bare in front of his subordinates, his career, his identity, his entire worldview reduced to ashes. He could not speak. He could not move. He could only stare at the woman who had become his judge, jury, and executioner. General Wallace finally relaxed from his position of attention. He looked at Thorne, not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. "General Thorne," he said, his voice grave, "you are to be commended for identifying a critical training deficiency in our senior leadership. Dr. Aris has graciously offered to oversee your remedial education personally." Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion. "Remedial education?" Dr. Aris provided the details, her tone once again neutral, as if discussing a software patch. "General Thorne will be reassigned, effective immediately. He will serve as my direct liaison for the duration of my system-wide diagnostic. His duties will include carrying my equipment, ensuring my logistical needs are met, and observing my work. He will not speak unless spoken to. He will learn to identify competence in whatever form it appears. The assignment is indefinite. It will conclude when I am satisfied he has learned the lesson. It was a fate worse than any court-martial. It was not a punishment. It was a forced education in humility. He would be a shadow, a servant to the woman he had tried to humiliate, forced to witness her brilliance day in and day out. His re-education would be his new and only mission. The story of what happened at FOB Sentinel that day passed into legend. It became a cautionary tale told to arrogant young lieutenants at West Point and a lesson in humility taught at the War College. The details, as they always do, grew with each telling. In some versions, Dr. Aris levitated. In others, she typed so fast the keyboard melted. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained. It was the story of the quiet professional, the hidden master who reminded an entire institution that true strength is not loud and true authority is not worn on a collar. It is quiet competence. It is substance over style. Years passed. On a rainy autumn day at the National War College in Washington, D.C., a guest lecturer stood before a class of the military's brightest rising colonels and captains. He was an older man, a retired two-star general. His voice was quiet, his demeanor thoughtful and deeply humble. He carried himself not with the swagger of a general, but with the quiet patience of a scholar. It was Marcus Thorne. He looked out at the faces of the next generation of leaders, and he told them a story. He told them about a dusty day in a desert, about a dark room filled with panic, and about a quiet woman in a corner. He told them about his own arrogance, his own blindness, his own catastrophic failure. He did not spare himself. He detailed his every mistake, his every flawed assumption. He held up his own humiliation as the central teaching tool of the lecture. For 6 months, he told them, his voice steady, I carried her pelican cases. I fetched her coffee. I stood in the corner of rooms just like this one, in 20 different countries, while she worked miracles. I never saw her raise her voice. I never saw her lose her composure. I saw her brief 4-star generals and heads of state with the same calm, clinical precision she used to instruct a private on how to run a diagnostic. And I learned. I learned that the most dangerous enemy you will ever face is your own ego. I learned that your assumptions are a tactical liability that will get people killed. And I learned that the most brilliant, the most capable, the most powerful person in the room is almost never the one making the most noise. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the rapt faces of the officers. Your job as leaders, he concluded, is not to command respect. It is to recognize competence in whatever form it presents itself. Your rank gives you authority, but it does not give you a monopoly on good ideas. The moment you believe you are the smartest person in the room, you have become a danger to everyone under your command. Never forget that. He finished his lecture and was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of heartfelt, thunderous applause. He had taken the most humiliating experience of his life and transformed it into a legacy of wisdom. His greatest failure had become his most profound success. He had, at last, truly learned the lesson that Dr. Evelyn Aris had set out to teach him. He had learned to be quiet and to listen. The story is not just about the military. It is a universal parable. It speaks to a fundamental truth of the human condition. In our world, so often dominated by the loud, the boastful, and the self-aggrandizing, we are conditioned to mistake confidence for competence. We are trained to look for authority in the corner office, on the podium, in the uniform, in the title. But true strength, the kind of strength that can hold the world together when everything is falling apart, is rarely found in those places. It is found in the quiet corners. It resides in the calm, observant souls who do the work, who solve the problems, who see the truth while others are busy performing. It is the quiet professional, the hidden master, whose actions are their only argument, and whose competence is their only crown. The real lesson of FOB Sentinel is a simple one, yet it is the hardest one to learn. Do not judge. Observe. And be prepared to be humbled by the quiet, unassuming brilliance that is all around you, waiting for its moment to save the day.